Have you ever shaken the hand of the farmer that feeds you? I am on a mission to get you to think more deeply about where your food comes from. Welcome to the Everybody Eats podcast. Today I speak with Erin Masterson. She is the owner and operator of Masterson's Garden Center, Beekeeper's Garden Apothecary, and she is also involved with East Aurora High School's Garden program. And we discuss the challenges to not only starting but also maintaining such a program. We talk about Erin's journey through beekeeping, how she stumbled into it and why now it's very important for her to teach beekeeping to others, and how simple products from the hive can be simple medicines for everyday use. Enjoy. Thank you, Erin, for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Glad to have you here.
I am very happy to be here.
So to begin, we're just going to start with your background and how you got into farming and agriculture.
Well, I didn't do it on purpose. I actually grew up in a garden center. My family owned a nursery. My dad was a landscaper, but that was back in the 80s and 90s. And so it wasn't really about farming or sustainability or any of that. It was really more about landscaping. So I grew up with plants, but I was always the one I wanted to plant some herbs and things that had more of a purpose to them. So even as a kid, I was fascinated by that. And then as I got older and had my own yard, and then I had kids and animals, I started paying more attention to what I was planting in my yard. I didn't want to just plant things that were pretty. I wanted something that was functional. And so that kind of started like the more of the backyard farming type thing. And I liked it. It's really satisfying to go pick things from your own yard and bring them in and eat them or make, medicine or something out of them. So it really just kind of evolved as I grew up. Wanted to take better care of my own family, and then, it kind of extended on to, I can teach other people how to do this. And so here we are.
So now when you first were getting involved, did you see it as more of a chore? Because for me, we had a garden growing up, but I definitely saw it as a chore. And it wasn't until later in my life that I realized the power and beauty of it.
Yes and no. So as a teenager working in a garden center, that felt like a chore. But then I would still go home and do the same things in my free time. So there was a deep love for doing it, but I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to grow things that I wanted to grow and water the things that I wanted to water. So yes, I suppose it was a chore as a kid. But now it's the thing I look forward to. I work all day in the garden center, and then I come home and decompress in my own garden, and that's my happy place.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to talk about 3 things today, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with a larger picture conversation about food. To begin, we're going to talk about your involvement in the East Aurora High's school garden. My high school did have a greenhouse built into the side of the high school. Can you describe the garden setup at East Aurora High?
Yeah, so we're lucky out in East Aurora. There's a lot more space than there would be in, more of a city school. So they've got a decent amount of space out there where they were able to put in, a shed that they can raise chickens in, with power and all of that. There's a couple of hoop houses so that we can extend the season on either end with cool season things. There's a place for the kids to actually go and sit and enjoy that space while they're working out there. And then they've got just some open field areas where they can plant, seasonal crops and that. And they have beehives up at the school garden as well. So it's a really nice space, and it's accessible and visible to anybody driving by. So it's not hidden, which is kind of a neat part of it too, that, people are seeing that this is being integrated into the school and have questions and want to know why is there a cow outside of the high school?
Yeah, that's great. Great. That's actually why I put my raised bed in the front lawn. I didn't want to have it in the back because I wanted it to be seen, and it is kind of tucked to the corner, but still I love just going out there, and when people walk by, and that sometimes will strike up a conversation, and that is another part of why I do this, is I'm trying to connect with other people who like this sort of stuff. So how did that garden get started?
There were a couple of teachers that really spearheaded the program, some of the environmental science teachers, and they actually got a big grant from a local foundation to set all of this stuff up, because in the beginning it's an expensive undertaking to build hoop houses and even the fencing and all of that. So there was grant money to do that. But what the teachers did was assigned the students to figure out what they wanted to add to the sustainable agriculture program. That's the title officially, is the sustainable agriculture. So sustainability is a huge part of what the kids are learning. So they then had to go and find a local expert to consult with to set up the project. So I was the local expert for the group that wanted to do beekeeping, and then another group that wanted to do pollinator flowers and cut flowers. So I was involved in the beginning, setting that up, budgeting, figuring out how many of each thing, how much space they would need. And then because I live close by and my children are at the school, I've been able to stay involved, for the last 2 years. So it's been neat to kind of watch the farm grow and just see different kids get involved as the years have gone by.
Did you notice that the interest was there, or did you have to foster any interest?
It certainly seemed like the interest was there initially. So it's basically an elective that the children were choosing. So they were choosing to be in this class. So particularly the group last year, being the first group that got to set the whole thing up, there was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. I think this year's group didn't know exactly what they were getting into. And so there are some that are really thriving and, kind of taking up the reins and doing a lot of the work, and other kids that I think figured out that this isn't the thing that they love doing, but now they know that. And so they might take, a piece of it that they did enjoy. But there's more kids that want to be in the program than they have space for at this point. So the hope would be to expand it to include more.
What kind of challenges exist for not only setting up a garden, but continuing the program?
In our climate, the weather is the biggest challenge because of the school calendar. So when we're harvesting tomatoes in July and August, there's no students at the school. So right now, when it's 7 degrees out, there's plenty of kids at school, lots of hands to do the work, but there's not as much to physically be done. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge here in the Northeast, the summertime. But so what they've done to kind of overcome that is put in some hydroponic stuff indoors, and work on selling and kind of making. We made lip balm with the class the other day. So we took the beeswax from the hives, created lip balm to extend kind of the production season and have something to do in the wintertime. But for sure, the money, not every school district has the money to set something up in the beginning. And then the weather are definitely the biggest challenges to doing this, easily at every school.
So what is the importance to you to get younger generations involved in food production and agriculture?
I think it's important just on a human level to understand where your food is coming from. If you're putting it in your body, it's nice to know what it is, how it's been treated. And part of it too is just, it's a little bit empowering to know I can grow things. There's something to be said for having done it before, for having been given the tools to know how to set up a vegetable garden and have that, I don't know that it's food security exactly, but a little bit, to have the knowledge to say, okay, yeah, if somebody gave me a packet of seeds, I could make food out of this. And the kids in these programs have done that. Whether they know the value of it yet or not, I think someday they'll be like, yeah, we did plant tomatoes from seeds and make sauce out of it. And they did that. So I think that's the most important part, is giving them the confidence to know that they can do it.
Now, out in East Aurora, maybe the food access isn't really an issue. So in more urban areas, how can the school gardens sort of address food insecurity in those areas and the malnutrition that may be accompanied with that food insecurity?
I think that answer is kind of twofold. So partly, if the school itself is producing food on the property, whether it's in a tower that's in the cafeteria that has fresh lettuce, or strawberries or something that the kids can actually pick and eat, they're physically nourishing the kids that way. But then the other part of it too is, like I talked about before, teaching them how to do that, and maybe they have a little pot on their deck at home that they can grow a little bit of food there too. So again, it's providing the knowledge, I think, to do it. With a program like they're set up out in East Aurora, they're kind of setting up maybe a template for other schools to do it. And I think that's an important part of it too. So, whether every student in East Aurora needs a free lunch, probably not. But hopefully they've, after a couple of years, figured out what works and what doesn't. What cost the most money to do, what was really a good investment, what they got the most profit out of, and they can then give that to another school. There's a school out in Attica that has an amazing farming program. And so we've learned a lot from them. So it's really about sharing that knowledge, I think.
Do you see in the future any sort of collaboration with, not completely local, I know like Cornell, it's a few hours away and they have like a pretty substantial agriculture program. Is there any sort of connections in the future, possibly to linking like a college curriculum into the school. I remember in high school, I did have access to like a local college's like physics class that I did, or maybe it was a calculus class. Is that sort of thing in the works, or is that maybe a little too complicated?
I don't think it should be complicated. I don't know if there's something like that in the works, but there should be. If there's not, I mean, this is one of the most basic human needs is food. And, if that's something that a college is doing well at, it'd be wonderful to bring kids up to learn that before they get there and have to pay.
And I think you did mention, but there are bees at the school garden?
Yeah, there are. So one of the groups, that was the project that they picked. And they went all in. They set up 5 hives up at the school. It was just last spring that they did it. So the hives will be a year old this year. But we were able to harvest some honey from the hives, and the kids got to do that part of the process. They actually got to spin the spinner, and extract the honey. And then they sold it as part of their the sustainability part of it, because it does need to sustain itself and pay for itself. So yeah, we've got still hives up there, and they are doing well.
So I want to know how you got into beekeeping, because I know it's kind of an interesting story.
I lived in the city of San Diego, just small city lot, about my backyard is about the size of my living room now. So real small space. I had dogs and kids and chickens and gardens, and as much as I could pack into that tiny yard. And one day I noticed an old birdhouse that had been just tucked away along the back fence, had bees coming in and out of it. And I, looking at the bees, said, "This is really cool. I think I want to keep them." And my husband, not being, he's very much a city boy. We're working on him. He said, "We're not keeping the bees. This is not a farm. You are crazy." I'm like, "All right, so find somebody to remove them safely." We were not going to exterminate them. That was never even a discussion. And he didn't bother to do that. And a year later, there were still bees in this birdhouse, and they had lived very peacefully with my family and my dogs and my kids. And I was starting to notice that my vegetable garden had so much more stuff in it. My orange tree was completely covered in oranges, and the lemon tree, the one thing I really miss from my yard there, had more lemons on it. So you were actually seeing pollination happen. You read about it. Yes, we need bees for pollination, but it was literally happening in my yard. So by then I was in love with them, and they were staying. And so I found a local beekeeper to actually help me move them out of this little birdhouse into a proper beehive, like the stacked boxes that you see. And she did it, and I got to watch the process. And we had a little chunk of honeycomb that was left over from it. And the first time I tasted that, it was still warm from the beehive. And it was just the most amazing thing I had ever tasted. Just to know that they had built that comb and collected nectar and made this amazing thing that was delicious, but also it was medicine right from my yard. And I was hooked from there. So I found that it was really difficult to find information about backyard beekeeping. So in California, there's tons of commercial beekeepers, thousands of hives that they move around. But if I just wanted to have 1 or 2 in my yard, it was hard to find information about how to do that. So I learned as much as I could. At about the same time, my brother and my dad back here in Buffalo were starting to do some bee stuff at the garden center that we own. And so we would talk about it. And I just learned as much as I could. I asked as many questions of as many people as I could find, and eventually said, I got this. I can do this. So I opened up a beekeeping supply store and started teaching backyard urban beekeeping classes. I'm like, if I can figure this out, you can do this. Like, this is totally doable. And from then I've been doing a lot of beekeeping classes. I've been doing it ever since.
I'm sure your neighbors in San Diego, if they had trees and gardens as well, were benefiting from that. And probably they may not even realize why, like you realized why. But I just remember a story from one of our customers at the garden center I was working at. They didn't have any bees, but they had an avocado tree that was always filled with avocados, and they never really knew why. And I was like, oh, you probably have like a hive somewhere that you don't know about. So I know with avocados too, they need to have like A and B type like pollination. You can't just have one tree or one tree. I mean, it might work, but they just had that added benefit of the bees really like doing a lot of the work, and they didn't even realize it.
And I think that's true for a lot of people. There are feral colonies all over the place. And we're not afraid of those. You don't know that they're there. Most people have a beehive. And as we're sitting right here, there are probably 5 within a mile radius of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just out doing their thing, which is important to remember because they're not scary.
Yeah.
They're honeybees,
Yeah.
And I think, like you said before, people are afraid of them. And so when I first started keeping bees in my yard, I would try and not let anybody see that I was doing it because I didn't want the pushback from fear. It's unjustified, but people are afraid of bees because they stepped on a hornet's nest once and think that bees are scary. And they're not. I mean, hornets are awful sometimes, but honeybees generally are pretty docile and make good neighbors. So totally doable in most places.
So for you, what's so enjoyable about being surrounded by bees?
It sounds funny to say it, and I don't know that I would have believed it in the beginning, but it feels almost like a meditative process. And the first time I noticed it was when we were preparing to move across the country, to move from San Diego to here. And I was selling my business and packing up my house and trying to figure out how I was going to get 3 dogs and 2 kids across the country. And I had to work with my hives. So I had my hives up on the roof at the time, and I was in there, checking them. I was going to give them to somebody, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. And it was a stressful day. And after about 30 minutes of working with the bees, I realized that I had not even thought about moving for those whole 30 minutes. And it was great to be able to take all the things that are driving you crazy and just put them down for a little bit. Because when you're working in a hive, you have to pay attention. It's a box of stinging bugs. You have to focus on what you're doing. And it makes it much easier to kind of let the other stuff go for a little bit. And then too, even on a more physical level, the buzz, the hum of bees is very much like the om. So the vibration of the hive is truly calming once you get past the, oh my God, I'm in a hive feeling, which is natural. But so really that's it for me. It feels good on a physical level to take that time to do it and to know that I'm taking care of bees. And everyone has heard that there's a bee problem. And so it feels good to be able to be like, all right, I got you. I'm going to take care of you guys at least. So I enjoy that part of it too.
That resonates with me because that's how I feel about tending to the garden in general. It's a very sensory experience, but also it does have that meditative component to it as well. I love just coming home from work, and sometimes I don't even come inside first. I'll just go and check in the garden. Having something to disconnect from the technology and reconnect to nature is so important to me. And a big impetus for this podcast is to show people in this crazy world we're living in, there's beauty all around us. And if we could just learn a little bit more about it, maybe we'll be a little bit more inclined to work with it and learn more from it. Because I think we can learn a lot from not only the bees, but just nature in general. Speaking of the bee problem, I always hear we need to save the bees and help pollinators. So what are the current challenges that exist for the bees, but also for beekeeping in general? And I know that varies from coast to coast because you have to deal with winter on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, that wasn't really a problem.
It wasn't, although winter isn't so much the problem. It makes the problem that all bees have worse, I guess. It's a big one. It's a big topic. So when we talk about saving the bees, there's been a little bit of pushback lately where people are saying, well, it's not about honeybees. They're an invasive species. They're not native to the U.S. We need to pay attention to the native bees. And I don't think you'd find a beekeeper that would argue that they are not native to the United States. There are, just in New York State, 450 plus types of native bees. And we're not talking about wasps and hornets, any of that, just bees. But honeybees have kind of become the poster child for the bee problem. And that's because they're managed, they're maintained. So as a beekeeper, I know whether I'm a backyard beekeeper with 2 hives or a commercial beekeeper with 2,000, I know how many I start the season with, and I know how many I end the season with. And I know that we're losing 30 to 40% of those every year. Those are bees that I've been taking care of, feeding when needed, treating when needed, if there's any sort of disease or illness going on. These are bees that are being kind of babied through the season. We're still losing 30 or 40% of them. Nobody's counting bumblebee colonies. I don't know how many we start the season with and how many we end the season with, but the things that are affecting honeybees are affecting all of the bees and a lot of insects and pollinators in general. So that's why we talk about honeybees. And truthfully, if you're doing something that's good for honeybees, it's good for all of the native bees too. There's not there in some places there might be competition for food if there are so many beekeepers keeping honeybee hives. Yes, there may be competition for food. That's easily solvable by planting more flowers. That doesn't have to be an insurmountable challenge.
Yeah.
So what I've found is most people that say, hey, I want to get into beekeeping become much better stewards of their land. And any native bees that are in the area are going to very much benefit from that because you pay attention to what you plant and spray and all of that. But the challenges are not winter. The challenges are disease and lack of proper nutrition in honeybees. So I can feed my bees because I don't move mine around, but they're susceptible to disease that's brought, from other bees. Bees are very social and they're flying between 1 and 3 miles in any direction away from the hive. So any disease that is in a bee population is going to spread to the next one very, very quickly. They bring mites back. That's the biggest problem that beekeepers face. They're just a disease vector. They're bringing viruses and other types of infection into the colony. And a lot of that happens because my bees aren't moving. They're staying right in West Falls, New York. They're not moving off my property. But there are bees from all across the country that go to pollinate crops mostly in California. 90% of our managed colonies go there every February to pollinate almonds. It's a massive number. So it's the same as if we took 90% of the people, put them all in one little place, and somebody gets sick. Now everybody that was over there gets sick, and then those bees get dispersed back throughout the whole country. So any disease that happens is not regional. It gets spread back throughout the whole country. So what's affecting bees in California is affecting bees in Georgia and Maine and every other corner of the country too. So it's a problem because we can't just stop doing that. We can't just stop moving bees around because we need them for pollination. So it's like when people ask, what is the bee problem? It's like a wheel with a lot of spokes on it. You can't just stop doing any one of those things. It's a bigger picture problem.
How can we build more resilience in the bee colonies?
That's a good question. And that's, I think, the biggest question in the bee world right now. So what's been happening, because we do lose so many to disease, and it's not necessarily identified exactly what the disease is. We know that we're losing 30 or 40% every year. The way we replace those colonies, because we need that many, we typically will divide a colony, so a healthy one, and purchase a new queen bee. So queen bees are the things that people breed. Now, they're not necessarily breeding them on a large scale for the healthiest, best, most disease-resistant. We're breeding for quantity. We just need more. So it's almost like if everybody needed to have a golden retriever and we're breeding them to make them look like golden retrievers, we're not necessarily going to have the best, strongest version out there. And that's kind of where we're at now. We've just needed so many to keep replacing that they're not the best version of a bee. And so there's been more research being done about how to breed more resilient bees, but that answer isn't clear yet. They're working on vaccinations, so vaccinating the queen against particular viral things, so that then that immunity is passed on to her offspring. And that's an idea, but that's also expensive. And commercial beekeepers are farmers, and they're not wealthy. I don't know any rich beekeepers. So I think we know what we need to do. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it. And we're just not there. We're not there yet.
Do you think part of the solution could be not only propping up the regular honeybee populations, but also, and this goes back to just planting more flowers, but propping up all the species of bees, and that way you kind of have a more diverse, I don't want to say gene pool, but like species pool. That way it's not like one disease can wipe out all of the bees that we use the most.
Yeah, I mean, really the answer is to not have to rely on honeybees for pollination. I mean, that's the answer to it. To not have to move bees on flatbed trucks across the country is the way we fix this. But we can't just do that, because, like I said, everything is so linked together. So ideally, farms are smaller and have places where the native bees to that area can live and do the job. That's not an easy thing to just change, when we've set up the system the way we have.
What is the most fascinating aspect to a bee colony, in your opinion?
That's a great question. And I think my answer changes literally every time I open a hive. So I've been doing it for about 15 years now. Every time I open a hive, I learn something new. I'll see something like, why are they doing that? And then you have to research and figure out why they are doing that. So really, I think that's it, is that we think we understand what they're doing. And I think we understand a tiny fraction of what they actually are doing and know how to do and have evolved to handle all of the things that we throw at them. They are amazingly resilient creatures. So for me, really, it's just that it's a continual learning experience. And I find that fascinating in general.
So what was one of the last things that you discovered?
Well, it's been a bit because it's January.
Or at least just one example of a fascinating thing.
So one of the neatest things to see in a colony is how they make a new queen. So when I teach classes, that's something that people always want to know about, is how do they elect the queen? How do they pick a queen? And it's really, they don't necessarily pick one, but they grow one. So they take an egg that's genetically exactly the same as every other egg in there, and they feed her differently. So she develops differently. And they form a cell, like a bigger bee bedroom for her to grow up in. And to watch a queen hatch out of there is one of the neatest things that you can catch. She almost makes a little trap door on the bottom, and she'll come out and she starts singing. She makes a sound that no other bee in the colony can make, and she only does it when she's very young, and they call it queen piping, or there's other words for it. But it is the neatest sound I've ever heard. All the books talk about it, but until you hear it in real life, you can't appreciate how cool that actually is. So just hearing a queen announce, "Hey, I'm here and I'm the new queen," is probably one of the coolest things that I've ever seen.
The most fascinating thing that I learned about bees is also related to a queen, and you can confirm that this is true or not, but that in their mating flight, they'll mate with numerous, I don't know if it's 100, but numerous bees, and then the queen can actually sort through all the genetic material and decide which one it will actually use in its production of the new bees. That's what I heard? Is that true?
Some of that. So when the queen mates, so she develops, she hatches out, she needs to mate. In order to lay a fertilized egg, which will turn into a worker bee, she does need to leave the hive. She finds these drones are boy bees, drone congregation areas where all of the boy bees have figured out to go. She'll fly through and she'll mate with 15, 20, maybe not 100, but a lot.
Yeah.
So she has her one wild weekend and she goes back. So all of that sperm is stored in her body. And I don't know that she chooses exactly what genetic material, but what she does do is decide whether she's going to lay a fertilized egg or an unfertilized egg. The unfertilized eggs turn into drones. They turn into more boy bees. So she is controlling that as much as the queen controls anything. So they kind of guide her to the different sized cell, and that will trigger her to lay a drone unfertilized egg. But she doesn't ever leave to mate again. So she stores all of that in her body for the entirety of her life, which can be 4 or 5 years, significantly longer than a regular worker bee. So whether she's sorting through genetic material or not, I've not heard that. But see, now that's another thing I get to look up because that would be cool.
So to wrap up with the bees, because you also do the teaching of beekeeping, why is that important for you to teach beekeeping? To make it accessible, I think. If you walk into a room and say, "I think I want to keep bees in my backyard," a lot of times you're going to get some resistance. And I think that's my goal, is to be like, no, it's not crazy. You can do this. And the more people we have, and like I mentioned before, when you start keeping even one hive in your backyard, you're going to change the way you look at your yard. You're going to change the way you look at the yards on your street. You're going to start noticing things that support pollinators because you're looking, you say, "Oh, the bees are all over that today. I want to plant more of that." You're for sure not going to grab a chemical insecticide and spray it in your yard. So you've kind of changed your way you're interacting with your environment. And that, at the root of it, is, I think, the most important part of it. Okay, let's get into the third topic here, and that is the business that you run in addition to the beekeeping and the garden center, is Beekeeper's Garden. And that's actually how we first met. and it was very random. I met your husband at a pop-up event at 43 North that I was just going to for lunch with my fiance. And to our surprise, there was a bunch of local farmer like product pop-up shops. And I was like, this is interesting. We actually started eating where the band was supposed to set up and no one told us anything. And then people were like, you need to move. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know anything was happening here. But anyways, after conversing with your husband and buying some honey, I expressed my interest in meeting you, the mastermind behind all of this, and so that we could collaborate in some form of media. And here we are. So thank you. But first, let's just discuss the origin of the Beekeeper's Garden. How did it begin?
So it actually began because I was a beekeeper with lots of extra honey and wax. Like, this feels like a useful thing. I should probably do something with it. So I think the first product I ever made, and I never intended to sell it or to do anything with it. I just wanted to, I like making things, I like cooking and baking and all of that. So I looked at the stuff. I'm like, I bet you could make soap out of this. I feel like there's beeswax soap, and it turns out that's not as common as you would think, but you can add it to soap. So, I didn't start with like a simple lip balm or, infused honey or something. I went for cold processed soap with the lye and all of that, because that's the nature of the way I do things. And so I started making that soap, and that was really neat to be like, all right, well, now I don't have to buy soap. I learned how to make it, and it's got my honey and my beeswax in it. And then, I started making other things out of it. And the cool part is they work. They're really nice. And so having always liked herbs and plants and, herbal teas, and knowing that there's medicine in plants, and then combining that with the massive amount of medicine that comes out of a beehive, it felt like kind of a natural go together to kind of marry those two things together. Beeswax makes a great base for salves and creams and lotions and all of that stuff. So then I was really learned more about medicinal plants, cultivated ones. And then actually when I moved back to Buffalo, I was really interested in learning more about foraged things. Like, what are the natural plants around us in this area? How can those be combined into, like a natural medicine type thing? So everything that I make either has beeswax or honey or propolis or something that comes out of the hive in it. And then any of the herbs and things that I can either grow or forage, I do. Certainly there are things that don't grow here that I use. But it was really just hey, let's see if I can do this. And I did. And the things they worked really well. And then, you start by going to a little craft fair and selling things. And then I was starting to get like really nice feedback from people about it. So I kind of continued with it. And I enjoy it. It's a neat way to start with, instead of going straight to an antibiotic, let's try try something that I can make from home. So
yeah, that's great. The products kind of range from raw honeycomb to natural skincare products, but I wanted to know what your favorite thing to craft is.
I make something that it's labeled herbal first aid. And I think that one's probably my favorite, partly because it incorporates all of the parts of it. So there's beeswax in it. There's different herbs that I grow and some that I forage. There are things in it that grow in your lawn when you don't put chemicals on your lawn and as weeds. Some of those are super medicinal.
Dandelion?
Yeah, that's a great one. Plantain, which is everywhere that soil has been disturbed, is a really powerful skin healer. Self-heal is another one that grows in my yard. So those combined with propolis, which is a thing that we harvest from the hive, and probably one of the most powerful natural antibiotics that you can find, goes into that stuff too. And I've given it to lots of people. I use it all the time on, any cuts or wounds in my own house. I've got a lot of animals. Everyone's always, there's always cuts and scrapes and scratches. And it's nice to just have a natural thing that I know how to make and to be able to use that and have it be really effective. So that herbal first aid is definitely my favorite.
So as the propolis, you said it's from the hive. Is it like a separate component, or is it something you have to like extract from the honey or like the comb?
That's a great question, because people don't often know what it is. And the best way to describe it is if you've ever seen a pine tree get nicked, it oozes sap to protect that wound. Bees will collect sap. So basically there's a lot of pine sap in it. Buds sometimes are real sticky there's resiny stuff on there. So bees will collect resin and sap and all of that kind of stuff from the plants around them. So it's going to be different regionally, what the components are, but it's all plant and tree sticky stuff. It gets mixed with enzymes because they're carrying it back, in and on their bodies, and that turns it into propolis. So instead of being a resin, it has become propolis. It gets mixed with a little bit of beeswax as they use it in the hive. But what they use it for, they'll seal any cracks in the hive. They'll coat things to keep them antimicrobial, so no fungus can grow, no bacteria can grow, no viruses can grow in it. And if something is like, for example, if a mouse dies in a hive, the bees will propolize it. They'll cover it with propolis so it can't decay. So it really is very powerful. When we harvest honey, a lot of times they've put it on the edges of the frames and along the sides of the boxes. So in the springtime, when they're not trying to seal things up as much as they are in the winter, you can scrape that really sticky stuff out. And then it's not easy to turn that into something useful, but you can either infuse it into an oil or make a tincture out of it. But you don't get a lot of it, so it's really valuable. But it's very powerful.
Awesome. So for me, I believe a combination of Western and Eastern medicine is kind of how I want to live. I don't want to just be like all pharmaceuticals and surgery and not have any place in my life for like some natural remedies. So for you, how do you see medicinal herbs fitting into the Western dominated medical system?
I think they're a great place to start. And, if my children are sick, we will absolutely go to the doctor if the things that we tried at home didn't work first. And there's a fine line with all of that. And I think, again, a lot of people are fearful of things that they don't know. And so the more you learn about herbs and the more you incorporate those things into your life, the more comfortable you feel with that. So I think there's definitely a place for it. We are connected to plants, whether we like it or not. We've evolved with plants, and we need them, and they work. Most medicines are derived from plants to begin with, so it's not a stretch when we think about it that way. I think incorporating more plant material, whether it's labeled as a medicinal herb supplement, or you're picking some weeds from your yard and making a tea out of it, that's all medicine, and it's a good place to start learning.
Yeah, for me, it's, at least more recently, I've just realized that food is medicine, or food should be medicine. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a food cure, but it's more like if you just think a little bit more about what you're eating and where it's coming from, that in turn will just make you healthier, and then you won't run into these health issues. And there's so many conversations about food choices and dieting and all that stuff, which we're not going to get into today, but this is a good segue into our wrap up and kind of final thoughts, a little bit of a larger picture conversation about the food system in general. So for me, I always say that the food system is broken, but I've kind of changed, or trying to change, my thinking on that, because it's not broken. It works. I just see it's efficiently inefficient, because really all that it exists for, it's feeding the masses, but it's also providing profit. So like, what's the most efficient way to make food to maximize profit? And that answer is not the greatest quality of food and monocropping and factory farms. So for me, I'd love to live in a world where we can eliminate factory farms, both meat and vegetable, but I don't even know if that's possible. Would we still be able to feed everyone? I don't know. How do you see our food system? Do you think it's possible to decentralize the food system? Do you think a small farm future is possible?
I do, but then that's when we talk about the timeline. In my lifetime, maybe. That's a tricky one. It's hard to unravel a system that took a long time to build. And so I think a lot of it starts with education by doing things like this, just talking about it. I think there are plenty of people who don't even realize that this isn't a good way to do things until maybe they visit a local farm and taste an apple off of the tree rather than something that's been sitting in storage for 6 months. Eating more seasonally, things that don't have to travel so far. So I think there's lots of small changes, and that, we vote with our dollar every single day. It's the less support big farms get, the less profitable they become. The more support a small farm gets, the more profitable becoming a small farmer can look. And I think that's been part of the problem is there's no money in it. So if you're a young person looking to make a living, to raise your family, choosing to be a small farmer is it's a tough call. And so if that can become a little bit more profitable in your community because you're more supported by the people that you live near, that's going to draw more people to it. So I think it's a slow change. But yeah, I think it's possible. I would never say it's not.
Yeah.
That would be a bleak outlook.
In LA, when I was interviewing people, the question I would always ask is a food forest possible, which was more tangible out there on the West Coast or Southern West Coast. You're growing all the time. And right now I still have the picture I took from one of the streets I lived on where just down the street, there's a few green patches of the lawn, but like right in front, it's just like a dirt patch, a dirt patch, a dirt patch. And people will water that too. And it's just the dumbest thing to me. And I don't want to go on too much of a rant, but there was just so much wasted space out there that I could see, I'm envisioning this as a food forest. And this is an area that people have access to food here. But for me, it'd be incredible to be able to just walk down the street and basically like harvest everything I needed that day. So that's just kind of a little tangent, but.
Oh, but it's not. That's the way it has to work. There's a generational thing, and I'm not going to pick on any particular generation, but there's very much this is mine idea.
Yes.
And that makes a food forest or thinking about someone picking the apple off the tree in your front yard a really difficult concept for some people to grasp. But if we move more toward that, so maybe you have your garden in your front yard and a couple neighbors down the street do, and you have a ton of carrots this year, and that guy has a ton of tomatoes, and now we are like, that's cool. We'll share some stuff. Yeah. And this guy has a lot of lettuce. And if we just lean into that a little bit, then it makes it not so crazy that there's a neighborhood cherry tree. It's slow, but it's talking about this kind of stuff. I mean, like, yeah, no, we can do this.
It's definitely happening, but it's just, I want to push it more forward. And in the past, I would do more documentary style videos of the local farms or just people's front lawns that had gardens. I would just interview those homeowners and see why they're doing it and how they see that importance to them and how that impacts their community. But then I realized that took a lot of time and effort, and a more streamlined way to get this information out, I realized, was a podcast. So that's kind of why we're doing this. So it's not only education, it's also just like awareness. And the good thing is it is happening, like I said, but it's just, I want to accelerate it. And that's kind of why we're doing this. So the audience is everyone, but it is also more, I think, gearing towards younger generations, because the more younger generations I can get off their iPad and into a garden, I can just see better for everyone in general. So what is one small step and one big step that listeners can do to help create the more equitable and just food system that we strive for?
As a beekeeper, we'll lean toward a bee-themed answer to that. But on a small scale, plant more flowers. Every time you plant a flower, that is bee food. Whether it's a honeybee or a bumblebee or any of the native bees that pollinate things, plant more flowers. There's lots of flower choices, but any flower is going to be better than grass. So that's a simple thing anyone can do, whether you have a balcony or acres and acres of space. And then on a large scale, like I said before, you're choosing where you're buying your food. You can choose to buy honey at the grocery store, or you can choose to buy honey from a local beekeeper. So just keeping things more local. And supporting the people around you who are doing things that are good. It feels like a small thing, but really that's a big thing.
So that's a great thing that people can do now. Just plant more flowers. It's pretty simple. We're getting closer to spring, so start thinking about your garden plan, or if you already have your garden, what you're going to add or what you're going to focus on. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your insights. Why don't you tell the listeners how they can learn more about the garden center, beekeeping, and then also Beekeeper's Garden? And I'll also include all that information in the description.
Masterson's Garden Center is my family garden center. We're out in East Aurora. We've been there for 40 years this year. We teach lots of beekeeping classes. We sell all the beekeeping supplies and the bees themselves. So really, if you're in the Western New York area and you are interested, you're going to end up talking to me at some point anyway. We also sell local honey. And then our plant material is really focused on natives, so native plants that are supporting, pollinators and a healthy ecosystem. And then we focus on edible things. So if you're going to plant something in your yard, plant a native thing or something that's going to give you food. It's also supporting pollinators. So, if you're looking to do better in your own yard, create your own little ecosystem, that's what we're trying to help you do, to give you the tools to do that. So come see us out there. Our website has tons of information about classes and what we offer out there. And then as far as the Beekeeper's Garden Apothecary products, all of that stuff is online anytime. I've got lots of new products that come out all the time. So sometimes I'm at craft fairs and that, but really online is a good place to find info for that. You'll find me all around town teaching beekeeping and gardening classes around the Buffalo area.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone that you think will enjoy it too.